I just want to give you the basics, make sure that we're all in understanding of how the process works. We just sat in on a webinar with the PMF group, and where they kind of informed us of all the updates. So this presentation has all of that information. It's not so much different from last year's, but there were a few little updates. So we want to talk to you about those, make sure everybody's aware. And then I really want to bring in Joe and Linnea, who will talk more about the actual experience of taking it, and also a little bit about the PMF program in general. So just to start off, just in case, I know a lot of people do know what the Presidential Management Fellowship Program is, but there may be those of you who are interested and not really have a good sense of what it is. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about the program. So this is actually, the PMF group was really excited to tell us that this is the 40th year of the program, and it was really interesting. One of the first slides that they showed us in the webinar was Sean O'Keefe. He was one of the first, was in the first class of PMFs, or back then they were called PMIs, that went through. And Sean, as you may know, is a professor here and a big part of our staff and faculty here. So anyway, very exciting that they showcased him for everybody on the PMF website when we went through our webinar. But it is the 40th year of the program. And the program is really designed, for those of you who may not be familiar with it, to be kind of a premier program for the federal government to bring in graduate students who are considered to be the best of the best. And really, if you look way back, it was in anticipation of upcoming retirements, of gaps in the management system. And what they really wanted to do was get young people in quickly, really give them a lot of professional training, a lot of professional development, a lot of opportunities to experience what it's like in different parts of the federal government, and then fast track them over those 2 years of the fellowship into management level positions. So this program takes students from a GS-9 entry level salary. By the first year, it hits a GS-11, and by the time that you're done with the program, you should be launching into GS-13 positions should you stay in the federal government. So it's really, it could take up to 10 to 15 years potentially to do that kind of fast tracking in the federal government if you had just gone in, through USA Jobs or through a general entry point. So the PMF program really is a premier program. It's extremely competitive, but I will put right out there right now, if any of you even have the slightest inkling that federal government is something you might consider, I would absolutely go through this process. You are eligible if you are graduating this year, and I'll go over the eligibility requirements in a moment, anywhere up to August 31st of 2018. If you're graduating in between there, this is your cycle to be applying. If you're not, you will apply in the next cycle. The other thing about it is 2 years post-graduation, you can also apply again for this program. Or if you don't apply this time for whatever reason, but decide later, oh, I wish I'd done that, you still have 2 years, at least at this point, the way they're running it, to apply after. So if you don't make it this time, you can absolutely apply next year again, and the next year again as an alumni. So I just wanted to give you that. It is a 2-year program. I should have mentioned that. And for this particular part of the federal government pathways program, you do have to be graduate students. So this is for graduate students only. And now, no need, this is on the PMF website, and I'm going to show it to you, but I just wanted to just re-identify some important points. If you are a current student, your degree must be granted between this past September 1st and upcoming August 31st, 2018. That is the parameters for applying in this cycle of the PMF. Don't worry about the alumni part. That's just there for alum who may look at the presentation later. Just as far as eligibility, you must be a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, or otherwise authorized by Homeland Security. So those are the requirements for that program. As I mentioned, it is a 2-year paid full-time position. You get salary, benefits, the whole kit and caboodle. You usually start at a GS-9, and then, as I said, maneuver up. Sometimes, based on previous federal experience, if you've done internships or worked for the federal government before, occasionally there's opportunity to enter a GS-11, but in reality, you're all going on the same track, so everybody's going to end up in the same place at the end of it anyway within the 2 years, so it's not that big of a deal. I did go in the charts and look at what the current GS-9 salaries are ranking from the step 1 to the step 10, and the range right now is about $55,000 to about $71,000. So those are the steps within the GS-9 level, so you can see it. There is quite a bit of flexibility in there for where you might fall with an agency, and each agency acts as its own kind of hiring entity, so it's going to be different for everybody. But those are the typical salaries that you would enter into the program should you make it as a finalist, and just a little bit about the career path, which we already mentioned. So why do the PMF, right? Well, as I mentioned, it really is, if you're thinking of federal government, it's something you absolutely want to apply for, you want to do, because it's a really, despite how competitive it is, if you do get into it, you're pretty much set. And what happens is you're not associated, you're not applying at the time you're going through the assessment with any particular agency. you're all taking the same general online assessment, which we'll talk about in a minute. But after, if you've passed through that and you're identified as a finalist, it's up to you to determine and connect with and look at positions with the agencies you're interested in. So many of the agencies in the government will host PMFs positions within their agencies. They will put those out on a system of jobs you can look at, but also you can network ahead of time or once you find out you're a finalist with agencies that you might be interested in and see if they are currently hosting PMF positions. There's usually a PMF coordinator for each agency that you will connect with at that point. And those details we'll go into, but I just wanted to give you some sense of, as you're applying for it, you don't really have to at that time know, well, I want to work for here or here, and you don't have to identify that in the initial part of the assessment at all. So there, in addition to this opportunity to kind of get in quickly and maneuver quickly, there are 80 hours of professional development at least. Many agencies will do a lot more than that, but it's meant to kind of get you up in management skills, to get you associated and kind of acclimated to the federal culture. There are specific topics they might talk about depending on what agency you're working for. In addition, not all agencies, but most agencies will allow you to do these rotations with other agencies. So larger organizations like State Department, places like that, who may have a lot of PMFs they're hosting, will allow the PMFs to, on certain projects, rotate out perhaps maybe, hi Joe, to Department of Defense or some other place where they might be coordinating on projects or priorities. Smaller agencies are not always able to do this, so that's just something that you can talk with as you become a finalist, you can talk with the agencies about. But there are also additional little short-term rotations, maybe if you're working for a particular place. I think Tom's just getting, hi Linnea.
Hi.
Sorry, I'm just doing my presentation part, so
sure.
Yeah, if you can listen or you don't have to, whatever you prefer.
Okay, I'll just listen in.
Okay, thanks. And as you're doing these, they may have like a project that you might, for 1 or 2 weeks, work with another agency or be sent out to maybe an Army base if you're working for Department of Defense or something like that. So there's lots of opportunities, but again, that just depends on the agency. And one of the biggest things about it is if you become a PMF, you become part of this really amazing, tight-knit cohort of PMF alumni, and many of them who stay in the federal government who are there to be supportive. And they do kind of bring you all in a lot of orientation. And I think Linnea and Joe will talk more about that in a little while. So in terms of some logistics about this process, that was a little overview about what it's about. And I guess I'll stop there for just a second and see if anyone has any questions just about the nature and purpose of the program. Okay. So in terms of some logistics about it, this is going to open up on USA Jobs. Okay, so the actual application for this opens up as an announcement on USA Jobs, and that is going to happen at noon on October 23rd. And then you have until noon on November 1st. So it's a shorter window this time. It's just a little over a week to finish your complete application, and I'm going to go over what those parts entail. There is an assessment preparation guide, which I'm going to show you in a minute. That is online already. Laura and I just got the email this morning that they just put it up this morning. So the official assessment guide for the PMF is online, and it will give you samples, ideas, numbers of questions, timing for each section. All of that is in the guide. They're saying right now to plan at least 3 to 4 hours to complete the test. This does not have to be one sitting. Total, it will take you 3 to 4 hours. There are different sections, which once you're in a section, you have to complete it. But before you move on to the next section, you can close that section out, submit it, and then you can come back another time and finish the next section. So there's like 4 batteries of sections, and then an essay that you have to do. When you're in it, you have to finish it, but when you're done, you can click out, submit it, and then come back to the other one at another time. But total, it's going to take you about 3 to 4 hours. Just a little note, I just threw it in this part. The browser can be a real issue. They recommend Internet Explorer Chrome. I just put that out there as a tip. It's something they emphasize a lot on the website, and you'll see that. All this information is on the PMF website as well. Just a heads up, we cannot offer, as an office, we are bound and have promised PMF that we cannot assist at any point with these applications from this point on, other than just providing you this information. They are unproctored, and they expect you to honor that in the way that you're doing it. And to, asking Laura questions about the essay or things like that, we cannot answer any of those questions. This is really outside of us at this point. And so I did mention when the application opened. And another huge feature, and Linnea, you might be surprised about this as well, is that they're actually going to announce a finalist the week of November 13th. It's usually like March. Wow. Yeah. So they're looking to turn this around. And the reason for that is they're trying to be competitive. One of the biggest complaints is, students will be getting job offers from other places anywhere from November, December, January, February. and just hanging in there hoping, maybe at the end of March I'll know if I have a PMF. And so they've recognized that, and they're trying to be more competitive. So they are actually going to turn this around within a couple weeks, and you will know by November that week before Thanksgiving if you have made it as a finalist. And when you're a finalist, essentially you have the PMF, just you have to go out and seek what position it is and work with the agencies to find that position. So that's a little change from all the PMFs that we've done. So just to give you a quick overview, I don't want to spend too much time because all of this is on the website, but what this is going to entail, this whole process is based on one online assessment, the one I just told you about that takes 3 to 4 hours. And basically these are the parts of that assessment. There's going to be a qualifications questionnaire, just contact information, address, basic information. It'll also contain eligibility, just making sure that you're going to get your degree at the right time, making sure that you in fact meet the citizenship requirements. They're going to require you to submit an unofficial transcript. Now, I know for those of you who are in our MPA program, this is a partial transcript, maybe 1 or 2 courses on it. That's absolutely fine. They will have you resubmit, completed transcripts, obviously, later on. But one piece that I really need to emphasize in this is PMF requires that these transcripts show your graduation date. Most universities, including ours, do not put that because it's uncertain. Nobody can predict when your graduation date will be. Things can happen. So what you're going to need to do is come to our office, and we have a letter. It's a verification letter from our office that indicates that you will be graduating within the time frame that's acceptable for this cycle. So that's just one extra little thing you'll have to obtain from our office. We have the letter. We can produce it basically on the spot. So you will have that. But we need this letter. This is going to have to be submitted with your materials to the PMF application because the transcripts for Syracuse do not indicate the graduation date, and they need that on there.
Come in, or you can just email.
Yeah, email.
careers@maxwell.sir.edu email, or any of us individually. It'll
Yep.
get done.
Yep, and so come to us. I mean, Josh's office, PAI office can do it, but we've taken over and we've taken the letter from them, so we didn't have to bother them with it. So you just come to our office and you can get that. You're going to have a resume that you submit. Does not have to be federal format. Does not have to be a USA Jobs resume builder. And in fact, this will not be looked at as part of the assessment process. It's just a requirement, if anything, to look at to verify a graduation date. It plays no part in the assessment, but it does need to be in there for your application to be considered complete. So it does not have to be a federal format. It doesn't have to be done on USA Jobs, but it does have to be in there. And I think there's a limit to the length of it, but it's pretty large, so don't worry about that. If you have veterans preference or any other types of documentation you need to submit, that will be submitted, and you'll have places in the application where they'll indicate that you need to submit those. And then you're going to move into that online assessment, which is, I'm going to go over in a minute, which is those sections and that essay. It looks to me like, in looking at the assessment guide, they're all true, false, multiple choice format, except for the essay. And then you're going to do the online essay. The only requirement that I saw in the preparation guide for that is 150 words minimum, so just in terms of timing and thinking about what you're going to do. And a new feature they have this year, and Linnea, this may make sense to you as well, they have a final submit button. That you're going, when this is all done, when all your sections are done and you're ready to throw this thing in there, you hit this final submit button and it will let you know that it's submitted. In the past, sometimes it's been sketchy, like you think you finished a section, but you're not sure, and it didn't really feel like you knew if everything got submitted. They've kind of addressed that. So when you're all done with everything, before it all goes in as a package, you're going to hit this final submit button. I haven't seen what it looks like yet, but that's what they say. So, yes, absolutely.
Just in the case of maybe you typically get disability accommodations for exams or something like that, you can put forth a request for accommodations for something like that if that applies to you. And of course there's instructions on the prep guide, but in case that applies to you, you have that available to you.
And I think they'll tag you if they're looking for you to submit documentation of any sort with that, you can do that right through the application as well. So that's just a quick idea of how that's going to look. I'm not going to go over this. This is all in the PMF guide, but just if you want to take a quick scan, this is kind of some of the information in that initial qualifications section. They're just looking at some of the basic skill sets you have, your degrees, and things like that. So no need to go over that. That's all on the website. This is a little wordy, I know, but I just wanted to give you a quick idea. There's those 4 batteries of areas they're going to assess in this test. And basically, I'm just going to back out of the details for a minute. They're looking for people who are going to understand and function well in the federal government and management positions. So think about all the skills that would relate to that: adaptability, flexibility, leadership, management skills, critical thinking, analysis. a lot of the same things all of you are already training in, have great skill sets in, and if you're looking for other jobs, would also be illustrating those same skills. So the idea of this is they've broken it into 4 sections that get at those things in different ways. They have a situational judgment situation, a life experience, critical thinking, and then an essay. So there's 3 different batteries of tests. And on the PMF assessment guide, and I might as well just hop over to that right now for a second because I don't want to confuse you. And I'm just going to end my show. So this is when you get to the PMF website, pmf.gov. You'll click on right here the 2018, if you can see where I am, application, and that will get you to right where I am. Here's where Laura was talking about the accommodations. And right at the bottom is where you're going to click on the assessment guide, which I have up. It's a Word document. And right here it gives you a little bit of information about each of those sections. So situational judgment is going to have 54 questions, take you about an hour. Life experience, critical thinking will have 20, and then your essay, they're allotting 25 minutes. They are timed, okay? So these sections are timed. And so this is just the beginning of the guide, but it gives you a little bit of a breakdown. And as Laura said, at the end of the guide, there's the information if you need accommodations. You can see here's the skill sets that they're looking for, in addition to any others. And then they explain each section. So part A, what is situational judgment? Well, they're going to look at things that put you in real situations that you might encounter in the federal government as a PMF and ask you to then answer a set of questions that might look something like this to help you, get a sense of what that might look like. They're not necessarily right or wrong answers, but they are definitely looking for a kind of an answer, if that makes sense, that would relate to working in the federal government. Yeah.
Is the quickness with which you complete the sections a factor in the score?
Not that I know of. I think it's more just that you do complete it. I think they're timed to keep people from being able to, spend, like once you're in it, spend 7 hours calling all your best friends in the federal government and finding out what the answer is. I think it's more time just to keep the idea, and Lene and Joe can talk more to this, but I think it's time more just to keep you, using your instincts and your gut reactions rather than doing, a lot of research to try to figure out these answers, because that's not the best way to do it anyway. But Lene and Joe can talk more about what they experienced in the process as well.
Is there any way we can get clarification on that?
Yes, you can email pmf.gov. There's a email that I think is at the end of the guide.
The last page, I think.
Yeah, it's right there.
There's anything for applicants, and they're very responsive.
Yeah, and they have a lot of people on. They'll respond to anything, and I just defer everyone to there because just like you, the information I have is the information they provide, so I don't have any more details than that. So I would really get right to them. And as Laura said, there's the stuff about the information. I also have an email at the end of the presentation, which will get out to you. So anyway, I just wanted to show you that's a guide. It goes over each section. The essay question, it could be anything, but they give you some ideas. Yeah, hi, Libby.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention for if people want more practice or more sample questions for situational judgment, there's a basically identical section on the Foreign Service Officer test, so you can check out the official study guide for that and older official study guides. They used to have something similar to, I guess the PMF calls it life experience,
right.
Called it biographical inventory,
right.
Just so you can have some idea what to expect.
And that's a great point, because when I initially way back went to down to PMF, and they ran a workshop for all of us on how they designed this online test, because there didn't used to be one, and they were launching it, and we were all really skeptical. How are you going to figure this out? And they said it's the same testers who make all those tests for the federal government, whether it be Foreign Service or other things. It's the exact same team making the same test, so you're exactly right. A lot of the tests for Foreign Service or other programs like that are probably very similar. But yes, any specific details about it, I would absolutely email PMF. They have it on their website, and also at the end of presentation, they have an email, and they have it manned. Even I ask questions, but they really ask us not to, and ask the students to get directly in touch with them. If they have any questions anywhere through the process, need any help, you can get that information from them. So I definitely look into that guide. Just a few mistakes that often happen, and I think with the final submit button, this will be less likely. They have really stressed in the webinar, do not use your syracuse.edu email. Use a Gmail, a Yahoo, something else. I think it more has to do with firewalls at universities and blocking systems and things like that can cause things to be difficult. So for any contact that you're expecting from PMF or wanting to initiate with them, they recommend you do not do it from your EDU. And I really think that just has to do with more with firewalls and blocking issues that sometimes happen. Incomplete applications, as I mentioned, this is a very common, I can't tell you the number of times I've had students who either waited too long and it didn't go in, it went at 12, it used to be a midnight deadline, it went 3 seconds after and they would not accept it, or they thought they had everything in and they didn't. So I think that final submit button is going to be, that's why they put it in. It's going to be a great confirmation for you that everything is there, but double check, make sure your batteries are closed out, done, your essay's done, everything's submitted. Just do as many double checks on that as you can. Not having a complete essay is often a big problem. And again, not submitting for the date. When this thing comes due, you can bet their server's going to be loaded. So I would just get this out of the way as early as possible to give you plenty of time to submit, ask questions of the PMF people, get your answers back. I would not wait to the last minute. Sometimes, you can imagine the stuff coming in at that point. There's usually about 10,000 applicants a year, give or take. So it's pretty extensive. And then once you are through the assessment piece and notified in November if you're a finalist, if you do get notification that you are a finalist, that essentially means you are ready to become a PMF. And now it's just a matter of finding what that position is going to be. They will do a number of things. There's a virtual job fair they're holding. Sometimes they have it in person, but this year they've indicated it's going to be virtual, and they've done that before. And I don't know if Linnea or Joe, I don't remember your year, which it was, but we can talk about that. Finalists also have access to an online PMF system called the PPS, which is where agencies will post the positions for their PMF finalists that they are looking for. And you have 12 months from the time you receive that notification. So let's say it is November 13th. You have until the very next year's November 13th to secure a position. Obviously, most of them are going to go right away as it's very competitive. They usually select about 600 finalists, but they'll adjust that depending on what they feel the needs of the federal government are, so that there are positions for everybody. So some years it's been 400, some years it's been 600. And you can imagine out of 10,000 people, that's extremely competitive. And so they do give time. Sometimes that just has to do with certain issues that might come up, or people might be trying to be very selective about where they go and working with an agency. So it doesn't have to be right off the bat, but you do have to secure that position within 12 months. And so any quick questions about that, because I really want to turn it over to Linnea and Joe. And like I said, we're available after this. All this information is on the pmf.gov website. You can email them directly. And, I just took all this exactly from their presentation. So there's nothing here that isn't there. But any quick questions before I go ahead and bring in Linnea's already with us, but Joe? Okay.
I'm here.
Hi, Joe. How are you? So let me do a quick.
Perfect.
Okay, let me do a very quick introduction. So as you can see from the screen here, but Linnea and Joe are both Maxwell alumni, in addition to also being successful PMF finalists in our last previous 2 years. So I'm just going to give a quick intro on each of them, and then Linnea and Joe, I was just going to have you, and I'll guide you with some questions, kind of explain your experience with the process, with the assessment process, and also, when we're done with that, also a little bit about the program and what you feel is valuable about it. So first we have Linnea, who you see up here and has been joining us. Linnea is a 2017 Maxwell MPA graduate, and she is currently a PMF in the Office of Data Transparency at the Department of the Treasury. And before Maxwell, she worked as an implementation manager in the private sector and taught English through Teach for America, who we just had on campus not too long ago. And next to her in this lovely picture is Joe Robowski, and Joe is currently working as a management and program analyst at the Department of Energy for the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy. So thank you very much. And I should mention, Joe is an MPA and IR grad from 13-14, and Linnea graduated with her MPA, as I mentioned, in 2017. And Joe, you were 2016 PMF, Linnea 2017, correct?
That's correct.
Right. So I'm going to sit down in kind of some, not in everybody's way here, but I thought I would start by just asking, and Linnea, if you could start, just to give us a little bit of a sense of, based on your experience last year with the PMF, and I think the assessment sounds pretty similar with maybe just a few differences, what you would advise after having gone through taking the test in terms of how to prepare best for it, and any tips or things that you felt were helpful or would have been helpful to you as you went through the exam. And then Joe, I'll ask you after Linnea's done to kind of pitch in your opinion on that as well.
Sure.
Okay.
So I guess I'll start with kind of the caveat of you don't find out kind of how you did on each exam, so I can't really say if I did well on one particular test or anything like that. So you can take that for what it's worth. But as I recall, I was just looking at the website as far as what tests they have, and it talked about the one test being on life experience. I felt like when I was taking that test, I had a few years of work experience before that. So I relied a lot on what did I actually do in a job. So it was a lot of kind of situational things. I don't know exactly, what answers were right or wrong. But I think that was the one, or I couldn't decide which, or if they had changed them slightly, but one seemed to be a bit about kind of personality, which is hard to know what the right answer is. I think there's maybe some idea of like wrong answers, but it's hard to know really what they're looking for. I think I would just advise to like be honest and be consistent, because it probably looks odd if you're all over the place on that. And then the situational judgments, I think, is a little bit trying to like assess integrity or something like that. So it was a lot of things, and they have examples in the guide, I think, of, you know, someone at work does this, what would you do, type of thing. And there's multiple options. So just kind of how you would handle that. And then there was the critical thinking test, and that was kind of more of a logic test and really required careful reading. I would say in terms of the timing, I know you mentioned that they're time tests, like that wasn't really a factor, I think, in the life experience or the judgment, because it's pretty much like you're not, the questions about your personality like aren't going to change the more you think about it. So the timing isn't really an issue. But I think the critical thinking one I spent a little bit longer on, just because you want to make sure that you're reading it correctly and not skipping over anything. So I would just advise kind of careful reading on that, because if you go through it really quickly, it's probably designed for you to get it wrong. And then for me, we had the essay portion, but as I recall, it wasn't scored in our year. So I think it was just the agencies could look at it later on in the process, and I don't really know to what extent they did that. But I guess just like one other word of advice is that I probably only spent maybe 2 hours preparing for the whole process. I went to a meeting like this, and then I think I looked over my notes from that, and then I downloaded the PDF from the PMF site, and then I think GovLoop or something like that has also a PDF. And so I just kind of read through those to make sure that I kind of knew what to expect. But they're not really going to help you as far as what you should answer or anything like that. So, but I would say I went to the library one night and just did it all in like 4 hours. And so I would say if you're like on the fence about whether or not to apply, you should apply, because it's really not going to take you all that long. And then if it works out, it's a pretty great situation for you. So that's kind of how I think about like the application part. I don't know if you want me to talk now about like later in the process or anything like that.
Why don't I move over to Joe for a second?
Sure.
So if you had, I know you took yours the previous year, I think it was pretty similar. But any thoughts, tips, or ideas you had about preparing and taking the exam would be great.
So the initial part of the exam was similar to how it was just described. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, great. Sorry that I'm not able to come to you via video. I just imagine, the most handsome bureaucrat you've ever seen, right? Stunning hair. Okay, so it was similar. I think that actually my year, we had 100 or a few hundred of the questions, maybe 150. So totally agree with what Linnea said earlier. There's not a lot of reason to go back and review your answers. Just make sure that you read them very carefully, maybe spend 20 or 30 seconds at least per question, and just proceed sort of with confidence and honesty. And my year, we had 4 essays that you had to write. I think they were scored, but you got to choose from a selection of 6 or 7 prompts. So you weren't really pigeonholed into writing about something that you didn't, have a strong opinion about. So each of them was less than 1,000 words, and it was fairly easy to just knock out one after another. And I think we have a fairly similar arrangement with my year, where I think we were given a total of 6 hours to complete the application. It's been a little bit, but roughly 2 hours for the multiple choices, and then 4 hours for the 6 essays. So the 4 essays. In terms of what did I do to prepare, the sort of line that I received from the PMF guide was that there wasn't a lot you could do to prepare beyond reading essay questions about yourself that you'd use in any kind of interview. So what are you interested in developing in terms of management skills? What do you think your leadership style is? What topic areas are you invested in, that kind of thing? And I would also put Kelly did a great job of describing the program, but even if you're not interested in federal service, you should apply, because being a PMF finalist is attractive for industry as well.
Very much. And one thing I will add, and I think Linnea and Joe both alluded to it, I know other students that Laura and I have worked with, that consistency point, like being consistent with the way you're answering throughout, is really critical. And a number of those who have been successful in the process have actually mentioned that as well. So when we're talking about the assessment, I just wanted to throw that in. And just reading carefully and being consistent in whatever view or perspective you're taking on how you're going to answer those.
Yeah, I just want to speak to this a little bit. So Linnea mentioned, in addition to the official prep guide, which according to the prep guide is the only prep guide that you should use, there is pathtopmf.com, and we're questioning whether it's updated with the most recent version of test information, but it at least uses the language of 2018, but Path to PMF is another resource that you can look at, potentially with a little bit of, criticism based on whether it's updated or not, is another relatively legitimate place to review information. PathToPMF.com, and then, what's the PMF one?
PMF.gov.
Yep.
And I have those on the end of the presentation as well. Great. So, Linnea, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, once you became a finalist and found out you're a finalist, what that process began to look like at that point, in terms of, how do you find out about opportunities? Did you already know what an agency you thought you wanted to work for? Did the career fair help? How did you identify the positions you were interested in?
Right. So I think we were notified, I found out sometime over winter break. So I think it was in like early January that they notified finalists last year. And then I guess probably because of like the change in president, there was a lot of uncertainty around that time in terms of what postings would be going up. So there was a bit of a delay, I think. And then probably a few weeks after that, they started posting things through the website. And that was a little overwhelming at first because there's like a tension between, I want to make sure that I get a job and I want to make sure that I get a job that I like. So they had a virtual hiring fair, and that was kind of an all-day thing. And that was kind of hit or miss, really, depending on the agency. So the idea was that each agency would have a booth. And then some were like manned by actual people, and they had like a video conference, and they did it really, really well. And it was just kind of like an in-person interview. And then others just had like a PowerPoint or something like that up, so you could kind of tell a difference in terms of how much agencies had prepared for that. But that was, I think, frustrating for some people if the agency that you really wanted did not have people manning their booth. But a lot of the ones that I was interested in did have people, and it wasn't really formal interviews, I would say. I think they were doing informal interviews, but they were definitely remembering you and taking that into account when you applied. So at that time, there were postings up, but they hadn't really started the interview process. So that was a really good opportunity to kind of make a couple of connections, and then you could follow up with them. And so that worked out for me in a couple different ways. So that, I think, again, was frustrating for some people because it was online and not in person like it had been in the past. But I think if you make the most of it, there's some good things that could come out of that. And then as far as the postings, I kind of wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. I think it's easier if you're open to working for different agencies and don't have just one in mind, because then you might end up a little disappointed if that doesn't work out for you. So I was pretty open. I think I applied to 5 postings, which is maybe lower than, I think there were some people who applied to almost everything. But then from those 5, I think I had interviews from 3 of them and then got job offers from those 3. So one thing that's a little hard about that is that the timing is different. So I got one offer while I was still kind of in the early stages of another job that I probably wanted more. So that was, hard to know if it's going to work out for you. So it's hard to know what all the opportunities are that you would get. So that was like a little bit stressful in the process. But overall, they just have like a couple page posting about what the position is, what type of work it would entail. And then they have like the grade. So some of them are 9 or 11. So you could take that into account. But I just did mostly phone interviews. And then I ended up it worked out really well because I was supposed to have a final interview over a phone, and we had the networking trip in DC that week, so I was able to do 2 of my interviews actually in person while we were there. So that was kind of how the process was for me, I think. And I would just like echo what was said earlier about if you have any questions, really email the PMF people. I think sometime after the initial application process, there was something that was unclear to me, and I emailed them around 10 p.m., I think over winter break, and they emailed me back around 11 p.m., which was amazing, yet slightly horrifying that they would be checking that. But I was pretty impressed with their response time.
Yeah, they have really made an effort to be really highly manned and responsive because they know how critical it is, and it's an even shorter application time frame this year, so I'm sure they are prepared for that. Thank you. Joe, just any thoughts in terms of your experience once you were identified
Sure.
with PMF and how you maneuvered through that process?
Yeah, so firstly, the virtual fair sounds 1,000 times better than the real one, the in-person one. There was a security debacle during my year, and I was one of only a handful of PMFs that was able to get through to these agencies looking to interview people. Everyone else was stuck outside as they processed their credentials, and there was just this massive quagmire that everyone was mired in. So I'm very happy to hear that the virtual fair is happening again. I took a little bit of a different approach. You have this sort of upcoming system that has a lot of the applications available. And so the advice I received was apply to everything that you could even be remotely interested in. So I actually did a few dozen applications that I had ready for when those positions were posted. Another thing that's very important to understand is that there is a single unified systems, but it's used very differently by every agency. So for instance, Department of State, because my year and historically is such a highly demanded agency to land in, that they would post positions for less than 48 hours. And they were all universally posted with GS9 Step 1 non-negotiable. And that wasn't the case for a number of different agencies. So think about, yes, where you'd like to land, but also what your requirements are in terms of finding gainful employment, because other smaller agencies or agencies that aren't necessarily as well known for doing good work that they do could offer more attractive positions. That's not to say that there's this huge, income inequality within the PMF program. Kelly did a good job of summarizing it, that we're all sort of a cohort moving forward, but do keep your interests open when you're looking for positions. There's also a little bit of uncertainty going through, what this program will look like as the administration continues to decide what it's going to do to get new talent. I was able to do a number of job interviews, some of them informational, many of them on a very tight turnaround. And I think that the advice that I'd have is create several versions of your resume, all very truthful, but to showcase different skills or knowledge that you've acquired over the course of your time up until the application, and have those ready to go depending on the type of position you're interested in. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Joe. And I was wondering if at this point, because really the point of all this is to see what this program is really about, and once you're in those positions, what you're finding to be the value of it, and the pieces of it that make you really glad that you decided to pursue this opportunity. So, Lynette, I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about, now that you're in the program, kind of tell us a little bit about your experience with it, and also what you see in terms of how it's benefited you, what it's providing to you at this point.
Sure. Yeah, I think so far my experience has been really incredible, and I think I felt lucky when I was a finalist, and then it's been really beyond what I imagined it could be. So I highly recommend applying. I think one benefit of the PMF is that people, when they, even within your own office, really look to develop you, which has been really great. And so we had a couple. Actually, I work with a couple Maxwell people in our office, some who were PMFs before as well. So that's a nice benefit too. But we had even just a new executive who came in and is very aware of the PMF program and kind of seeking out developmental opportunities for me. So that's been really great. And I think also a big component of the PMF is that you're required to gain a certain number of training hours. And so because that's kind of written into the agreement, they have to really make sure that they provide that time for you. So you can really identify kind of what skills you're interested in. So I do a lot of data analytics. So I've been taking more some coding classes, and then also just kind of general leadership development or exposure to other areas of the government. So I work in the office that was implementing the Data Act, which is showing federal spending for all government agencies, which is a really neat opportunity because I get to work with pretty much every agency within the federal government. And so you have contacts there, which is great. When I think I talked to Professor O'Keefe before I decided which position to take, and he was advising me to try to get something where you would get a lot of exposure, just because, it may not, I never thought that I would work at the Department of the Treasury, but like it's just great to know and have a better idea of what different areas of government do. So think of it kind of as a developmental experience like that. And then recently I've been working with one of our executives on writing a data strategy for our entire bureau, which has been really great because we get to interview all the assistant commissioners, which has been great exposure to even just what our bureau does. But I think a lot of that has come just because they know that I'm a PMF in the office and are like looking to really develop you.
And Joe, how about your experience so far?
Yep, I can absolutely take back that. So a few levels of the advantages that she just brought up. One is that you are sort of given more access to training budgets that exist within your office. So you can more easily justify reasons for needing to attend valuable trainings that might be more of a fight if you weren't a PMF. And secondly, a lot of trainings for federal employees that sometimes cost money are free often to PMF. So for instance, there's a congressional briefing that's an entire week long. I had never heard of a thing close to that before becoming a PMF, but it counts for 40 out of 80 of your hours for 1 year. And it costs, thousands of dollars unless you are a PMF, and then it's offered to you for free. So there's kind of these 1-2 punches in benefits for the program, and that really can't be overstated. It's tremendous. The other thing that I'll mention is that many agencies value the insights that PMFs bring. So I find that you tend to get invited to more things like conferences or to be on a panel. And it's a way for you to sort of show that you had academic rigor and experience in the workplace, so that people reach out to you when they're looking for authors on publications or someone to lead a project or anything like that. Another thing I'll mention is that the rotation is a very valuable chance to get to learn an entirely new skill set. So for instance, if you are in an analytical position, but you want to try your hand at sort of personnel management or program restructuring, you can absolutely do that. And the cool thing about doing rotations is that you are sort of free labor for wherever you're landing. So whereas when you're trying to get a home office, once you've been offered that finalist position and you sort of have to work with the positions that are available, unlike that, with the rotations, you can go and make a case for why you'd be worth the free office space that you'd be taking up. And essentially, you'd be almost like a volunteer there. So they'd be getting even more value out of you. So if you really are dying to do a rotation somewhere like DOD or DHS or Department of Energy, we can always, almost always find space and the resources needed to set you up to be able to contribute and do work there. So those are two really important points of the PMF program.
And I just had one question. You both just made me think of it. Is there somebody in your offices who kind of is either mentoring or guiding you as to how to best take advantage of your PMF in terms of these trainings and the things that you are, your rotations and things like that? Is there somebody who's supporting you in that within the office or at least within the program?
Yes, there's a Department of Energy PMF mentorship program. Many of these larger agencies have their own sort of cohorts of alums who've passed through over the course of the years, and they're always looking forward to opportunities to try and bring new PMFs up through the ranks. And additionally, there are some agencies like Energy that structure that into performance plans. So former PMFs are very eager to take on new PMFs because it helps them complete requirements as they move up with their own careers. So yes, there is a structured, terrific, very hands-on mentorship program at Energy. Just a quick pitch.
How about you?
Yeah. So we have at our bureau, we have a coordinator, a PMF coordinator, but that's a little bit more administrative, I would say. And then from what I've heard, I think Energy does have a pretty great mentorship program. I found so it's sort of a requirement that you have a mentor for the PMF. And when I was asking about that, it seemed that it was a little bit of just like a box that they were trying to check, and I didn't like that. So I actually sought out, so it has to be someone outside of your chain of command, but I asked someone there who I thought would have a lot of connections if she could find a mentor for me. So she actually set me up with someone from Energy, and that's been really great because now I get to hear kind of about how things work at a different agency rather than thinking that every area of government is like my work. So I would say if you end up at an agency where they don't have something like what Energy has, if you're proactive about it, it can still turn out really well.
Laura, anything you can think of?
No.
Okay, I'd like to turn it over, if I could, if Linnea and Joe would mind, see if our students have any questions that we didn't cover in any of this, or just to clarify things. So, were there any questions for Linnea or Joe related to? We have one over here. Yeah.
Hi, so I'm just wondering, in terms of the process, so once you're named as a finalist, then, do you have to accept your status as a finalist and say that you're only going to apply for these jobs, or once you're, in the pool, are you still able to look for other opportunities? What's that look like?
I'll let Linnea and Joe answer that first, and then I'll go ahead.
No, once you're a finalist, you don't have to say, oh, I'm only going to apply to these. No, you're open to apply to anything within the PMF system as well as without. There are lots of finalists. I won't say lots, but there are several finalists that I knew took jobs with the private sector. And some of them indicated that having PMF finalists on their resume helped them, and then others it was irrelevant because they'd already found other things. So no, you're not pigeonholed into anything. You can apply to every single position if you want.
You're not obligated to take it or confirm, yes, I'm a finalist. So remember, you have that 12-month window. So some people will evaluate options through, and maybe at the end decide, well, maybe it is PMF, and if there's things left, if they can work with agencies to see they pursue it later on. Ryan, did you have a question?
Yeah. Well, putting on the hat, let's say for some of us who hopefully may be lucky enough to be considered a finalist, will be considering various jobs. And just playing around with you, say, jobs, I noticed that obviously there are different pay scales, but I noticed that for some jobs, there's a ceiling. There could be one job where you're classified as 9, but you can go up to 14. But there's another job that's 11, but it only goes up to 12. Was that a factor in your consideration for finding exactly which job you wanted within the PMF?
That's a case-by-case basis, and that's the way things work throughout the federal government. So you'll accept a final job offer, and that will include both the starting and promotion potential pay scales within it. And that's par for the course for any federal employment.
Yeah. And Ryan, most of the PMF is geared to enter at a GS9. Where exactly in the step level, that might depend on the agency, but they're all intended to
pretty
start
much
GS9.
Yep.
Yep. Other?
If you have prior federal experience, you might be able to go back and argue with the person who's offered you a job. If you feel fairly confident that they're really looking for you in the position, that you should start earlier. And also, if you've got federal, employment experience, you can put that right into your resume and have HR calculate those years as counting. But for, by and large, things start as a 9, especially at popular PMF agencies. I can't emphasize that enough.
Thank you both so much for speaking with us. It sounds as though the best way to go into the process is not necessarily to have your heart set on a particular agency. That said, what would you say are the main agencies that a lot of PMFs go to, and what should we be aware of? I know that, for instance, the Department of State has, earlier this summer temporarily withdrawn that they weren't hiring any finalists.
They said that, just to update to that, the webinar indicated that in fact they are.
Okay, good.
Yeah, it might be more limited and they might still be evaluating, but they said that is not in effect at all and they are still in the PMF program.
Real quick, I know that I've spoken a couple times in a row, and I don't want to take time away from Kelly or Leanna if you've got things to say. But really quick, out of the bat, the thing I would advise very strongly is if you do receive the finalist position, make sure you set a good amount of time to frequently and really deeply commit hours to checking in on positions, because like I said, there are some that are up there for weeks and others that are up there for hours, and then be able to really cater the cover letters and resumes that you're submitting for each position. That's incredibly important. With federal employment, as well as everything, you want to include the keywords, that's the KSAs, which is knowledge, skills, and all of those phrases like program management, certain types of statistical software, that kind of thing. So I would, more so than say keep your options open, I'd say keep yourself free in order to work on this kind of stuff, because your dream job could be one of those that only comes up for 36 hours, and it would be a real shame if, it went by and then you had to take something that you might not be as excited with. So I'd say my number one piece of advice is, if you are a finalist, check it every day, multiple times a day, and have your materials ready to submit.
Linnea, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I would agree that you should really keep your mind open to what agency you want to go to. In terms of which had a ton of postings, I think I remember USDA had a really high amount, hired a lot of PMFs. But I think one thing to keep in mind, if you are more IR focused, I think once you get in government, it's easier to move around, and you could potentially do your rotation at one of the agencies that you had wanted to be at if there aren't a lot of postings for that. So I wouldn't view that as a barrier to doing the PMF.
Thank you. And did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm curious. The PMF is a 2-year commitment. When you look at other people that have kind of done PMFs and what have you, what level of people are really trying to dive in and have a full career in the federal government and be in it for the long haul, and how many and what is the level of acceptance of people that might be in it for 2 years and then kind of pop out and proceed with a different career track?
Yeah, I don't know if just from your experience
I
being part of the PMF, Joe and Linnea, if they talked about that at all.
Yeah, I think at my bureau, a lot of our upper management, they were PMFs and then moved up through the organization. So that's common. But I also know a fair number of people who just did the 2 years and then decided to pursue something else. So it's hard for me to really say what the breakdown.
I think just with my incomplete experience, I'll say, because I still have a year left, about 85% of people go through the 2 years and continue into federal employment, and some people leverage the position to get somewhere else.
I know sometimes there's, sometimes students have to stay with the same agency. I think at the end of the program, there are, people available, whether they be previous PMFs who are now at the agencies or through the program, to help you kind of maneuver if you're deciding that I love this agency, but I really am now interested in staying in the federal government, but applying with a different agency. As Linnea said, many stay with the same agencies because they're, those are easy. It's not a guarantee. So it becomes almost like a job search process again, but with a lot of extra support. And certainly if you've been with an agency and they love you as a PMF, it's probably not going to be any issues, but it can vary case by case.
So, Kelly, you've just reminded me of something that I was hoping for a window to say. Something to find out if you become a finalist is there are internal protocols with every agency in terms of hiring PMFs full-time. As an example, there are some agencies that require offices within that agency to have a full FTE position available permanently before posting any kind of PMF offer. Department of Energy is one of those. So you won't, if you go there, be stuck where you're like, okay, I'm at the end of my 2 years, now I really have to fight in order to convert to become a PMF. There are agencies where that is true. And there's really no official way to figure out which of those agencies are. But if you know anyone in the PMF program, myself included, I can help guide you through that in terms of which agencies require different management practices. And just as a caveat, those are always changing. So it's a little bit of a political rat race, as is everything inside the Beltway, full disclosure. But there are plenty of people who are willing to help you navigate it.
Any other questions for Joe or Linnea while we have them here? And I know I will ask if Joe and Linnea might be available if students have questions in the future to contact you.
Absolutely.
And we also have a list, and I think both Joe and Linnea were provided with this in time, of all of our previous PMFs with the most updated information we could get on them. Not all of them the state of the federal government, but we do have their current positions and so that you can at least reach out to them as well. And you had one more question?
Yeah, just regarding the political stuff. Personally, before coming to Maxwell, I was a political operative. I'm just curious about the political or apolitical nature of these roles, how you proceed in yours, and how you kind of see others doing the same in theirs as PMFs.
That's a great question. Some PMFs do a rotation in between different branches of government. So the majority of federal workers work, of course, for the executive branch, which is where the Department of Energy lands and the Department of Treasury. And so we work for the president, but we also work for the Constitution and the American people. It's back to that public administration and democracy course that happens in the summer. I think that's what happened. So you serve a lot of masters, but you do so apolitically, right? You just essentially apply the skills and energy that you have every day to the tasks that you are lined up against. So by and large, I think that federal employees, at least that I interact with, are very good at removing their politics from their practices. That being said, a lot of people in the Beltway and also at the field offices across the country are working in government because they're motivated by certain ideals, right? So it's a little bit of a balancing act. There's not a lot of, treachery or backstabbing or anything like that you need to worry about, other than the fact that it's a competitive program. So there is one thing I'll say, though. If you are interested in doing a cross-branch rotation, you're allowed to do that, but you have to get special permission because no one is allowed to work for multiple branches of government at once. So you can't be doing both because that's actually a conflict of interest. You can't be rotating onto a congressperson's staff and also have leverage over public dollars in the executive branch role that you fill. So, it's fairly easy to navigate. It's all about figuring out what information is available. That's what I'd say is political.
Yeah, I would, I guess there's like two ways to think about that. So yeah, one is coworkers. I would say everyone's pretty apolitical at work. And then as far as how much what the administration wants impacts your work, I guess. So I'm in an office, we're working with opening data, which is pretty bipartisan. So I've been really surprised at how not political it is. But I would imagine that varies a little bit by agency, but I can't really speak to that.
I would say use your common sense, though. If you are risk averse personally, hold off on applying to places that are on the chopping block. This year, there are a lot of those. So, there's always shifts with every administration transition. But this year, those priorities and those changes have been pretty well stated. They've been made public. So before you apply anywhere, I, of course, would read whatever fiscal year budget is out there. And if your dream job exists somewhere that's been targeted directly by the president or by the head of OMB, maybe have a contingency plan.
So any last words of advice? I know in the interest of time, I wanted to make sure we could move on, but I just thought if there was any last parting words, anything I didn't ask or that you thought was important. Linnea, I'll start with you.
Sure. I mean, I think I covered all the points I wanted to. I would just encourage everyone to apply because I think it's a relatively short process and like the benefits are pretty high. And yeah, just best of luck, and I'm happy to help in any way.
Joe, any last words?
Totally echo that. Totally echo that. It's such a high reward versus risk ratio. You have to do it. It is so easy now to apply to this process. There's no in-person interviews. There's no group activities or timed in-person tests, as I understand. It's much more approachable of a process to do. So I would encourage everyone who's even remotely considering this as a career to apply, even if you just want to leverage it to get into, your favorite company. It's something that is recognized almost everywhere as having value. So definitely echo that applying thing. The other thing I'd say is if you aren't selected because of some, algorithm that your answers didn't match, don't be discouraged. Apply again. That's what I'll say.
Well, thank you so much, Lene and Joe, for your time. I know it took a lot for us to get to here. I really appreciate it. Joe, I just wanted to let you know Nell was here and wanted to say a quick hello.
Hi, Joe.
Oh my God, Nell's the best.
So thank you both so very much for your time. It's so appreciated, and I will be in touch. And obviously, students may be in touch with you. I really appreciate your offer to help them.
Sure.
Whatever.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
And all of the students present, listen to Kelly and Nell. They'll guide you in the right direction. Totally. Write it down. Write it down.
Thank
All right.
you.
Talk to you guys soon.
All right, bye, Joe. Bye, Linnea.
Bye.